And I hope when this meeting is over, you'll take the chance to take a walk around, because really spring is at its height at the moment. And I think it's a very special spring somehow this year. The blossoms are amazing, heavier and more beautiful than I can remember for a long time. Perhaps one always says that in the spring, but somehow it strikes one afresh, certainly. So today, of course, is the day of the Sukha Gakkai, and also the day of the master and disciple, because it was on this day, that 3rd of May, that Mr. Toda was inaugurated as president in 1951, and it was on this day that President Ikeda was inaugurated as president in 1960. So it is a mark of this day that we should consider in a way what this master and disciple relationship really is, because it's also a very difficult thing somehow for people in the West to put their minds to. So I took what we've taken before on this day as our material in order to consider the master and disciple relationship. This was a speech which Sensei made, I think the year, I regret to say I forgot to look it up, but I think it was 1973 or 1974. And it was later published in a booklet called Sukha Gakkai, Its Ideals and Tradition. And I've always felt it was one of the clearest and perhaps most beautiful statements that exist about the master and disciple relationship, which is fundamental to Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. So this we have to challenge and understand if it's fundamental to it. So I hope through this little bit of study today it'll become clear why it's so fundamental. So first of all, I'll ask Suzanne if she'd read it most of the way through. All right?
The master-disciple relationship. In carrying out this kind of revolution in one's inner and outer self, the true human revolution, the question of a master-disciple or teacher-student relationship becomes of great importance. By chanting to the Gohonzon and working for Kosen Rufu, one can bring about a revolution in one's basic life force. But in order to advance and further cultivate oneself as an individual, one must develop meaningful relationships with other individuals. Some of these will be relationships within the organization of the Sukha Gakkai. Others will be relationships within one's profession or place of business, or with people in one's community. And of particular importance, as I have indicated, will be the master-disciple relationship. If one is learning some art or technique or pursuing academic study, one must put oneself under the direction of a teacher if one hopes to make genuine progress. How much more necessary is it for one to do so, therefore, when one is pursuing the practice of Buddhism and its doctrines, which one might call the art or way of being a human being? Nichiren Daishonin has written of the importance of the teacher in these words: though father and mother sire and bear a child that has eyes and ears, if there is no teacher to give it instructions, then its eyes and ears will remain those of a mere animal. This is a vital point to keep in mind when we come to the question of sustaining faith. Animals, as well as human beings, clearly manifest a relationship between parent and offspring. The parent animal guarding and nursing its offspring, the offspring displaying attachment to the parent. But the master-disciple relationship has no counterpart in the animal world. It is a relationship known to mankind alone. I would like here to quote the words of the former high priest Nichijun Horigome, a man President Toda looked up to with the utmost respect. Speaking of President Toda, he said, he carried out the master-disciple relationship to its fullest. For him, the correct observance of the duties and obligations involved in the relationship between master and disciple constituted the standard for his whole view of human life. It was because he was so thoroughgoing in this respect that he was able to attain his profound understanding and mastery of the way of Buddha. The high priest went on to say, "What should the Soka Gakkai take as the foundation of its faith? I believe it is of primary importance that it should begin with a clear recognition of the master-disciple relationship and proceed to develop and deepen its faith on that basis. The powerful faith that the Soka Gakkai displays today derives solely from that basis. This, in my opinion, is the core of President Toda's teachings. The student must trust the teacher, and the teacher must guide the student. When these duties inherent in the relationship are fully observed, then one cannot fail to attain the true way of Buddhism."
Let's pause there and consider that last paragraph. Particularly, first, that line which says, "It should begin with a clear recognition of the master-disciple relationship and proceed to develop and deepen its faith on that basis." So, do we have a clear recognition of what the master and disciple relationship is? If the master and disciple relationship is fundamental to an understanding and practice of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, it becomes very important that at some point, as early as possible in one's practice, one should challenge and recognize what that master and disciple relationship is, if one is going to try to establish such a relationship. So, unfortunately for us in the West, the principle of a master and disciple relationship is sort of foreign to us, and we tend to gloss it over whenever it's mentioned. I'm going to look the other way now. And we know it's there somewhere. We know that it exists. We know that people place great emphasis on it, but somehow or other it's very difficult to challenge. We don't mind the idea of being a disciple of Nichiren Daishonin at all, do we? But being a disciple of a living human being, i.e., in his day Mr. Toda, or in now President Ikeda, is something totally different, quite understandably. A living person whom we feel maybe we don't know at all. And we get troubled about it. But I think a lot to do with this is the connotations that exist in language about the words master and disciple, and also the unfortunate events which have occurred in the past in terms of a master and disciple relationship in other religions. So I think in Christianity we definitely get the impression that the disciples walked in the master's footsteps. I mean by that they sheltered under the greatness of their master. And when he finally died, this was a tremendous blow and shock to them. And I think both before and after Christ died, we see in some of the disciples a certain weakness. Those of us who have not had to challenge Christianity, for one reason or another, we can look at the 60s, when there was a fashion for people to go and worship the feet of gurus. And indeed, in some Hinayana Buddhist sects, sitting at the feet of the master is commonly seen. Sitting at the feet of the master, looking up and almost worshipping him, if not really worshipping him, adoring him or her. and what is more, giving in to the master's every whim. Perhaps one of the most awful cases of the master and disciple relationship was the fearful mass suicide of the Guyanian in Guyana, of I think it was called the Children of God. At the request of the master, blindly, each one of those followers, some I think 250 of them, perhaps it was more, committed this mass suicide, mesmerized by their relationship with this master. So in a way, with all these happenings, it's not surprising we may hesitate about this matter of a master and disciple relationship. But in fact, of course, the master and disciple relationship in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism is something so totally different. I wish it could be called something else. And what is more, Nichiren Shonin, the high priest at the time, Mr. Toda, was president, insists, and rightly so, that it's the foundation of faith in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, and therefore must be the foundation of faith in the Soka Gakkai. And then a bit later on, in this same paragraph, he says the student must trust the teacher, and the teacher must guide the student, emphasizing all the more the close relationship between the master and the disciple, isn't it? The key point, I believe, is for our understanding of this, and to put our minds at rest, is that in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, we do not find in any sense that it is based on blind faith and fairy tales. It's based, isn't it, on actual proof which we gain in the reality of our own daily lives and actions. This, of course, is unique. And can only be because of Nichiren Daishonin's absolute confidence that what he was teaching was the ultimate truth of life, and that all those who practiced would gain that actual proof in their daily life. So rather than following in the footsteps of a master or blindly obeying him, the master gives us in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism his experience of action, his action, based on the teachings, the Gosho. In other words, he gives to us a modern day interpretation of his experience of applying Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism to his daily life and actions. And having absorbed that in whatever way, through listening or through reading, we can then prove the validity of that guidance by putting it into action in our own daily lives. That is how we can gain faith. Of course, it applies the same when we study the Gosho directly. But definitely we have to admit that the help of the Master in bringing us to understand the Gosho and to relate it to our lives is priceless. So because of cause and effect, however much we would like to meet the Master and get to know him, which is only a human thing to want to do, through cause and effect, we're unlikely to do so until our faith develops to the extent that we've made the causes in order to actually meet him. So this is vivid to me, because when I first started to practice, like I'm sure many of you, I couldn't understand the master relationship. And what's more, at 50 years old, I was deeply suspicious of him. And I was living at that time 500 or 600 yards away from where he lives in Japan. And I never ever saw him. Never once. All sorts of other people were seeing him all the time. Walking through the streets, or driving through in his car, waving to people, and so on. But for 18 months or more, I never ever saw him, though I lived so close to him. One day this began to penetrate my thick skull, and I began to think, it's really a strange thing. And minutes ago, my wife was seeing him. Her friends were seeing him. People I got to know in the Soka Gakkai were seeing him, but not me. It was really a weird feeling when it suddenly penetrated me, and I realized that I was taking no steps whatsoever to connect myself with him. And so from that time on, I began to chant for his good health and for the success of his travels, to make friends with people all over the world, and so on. And then I met him. So strange. A few months after I'd started to do that. So this is just simple cause and effect, of course. There's nothing magic or mystic or mysterious about it. It's pure cause and effect. At any rate, whether we know him, whether we're able to meet him or not, and of course if one is far away from him geographically, that may be very difficult to do, and is not necessarily anything to do with one's faith. In my case, he was living round the corner, which is very different from living 8,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away on the other side of the world. At any rate, we can absorb everything that he teaches through studying his guidance, which is his experience, as I say, of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism and work in his own daily life. We don't absorb that in order to copy it. We read it. If we are wise, we read it again, and if necessary again, to fully understand it. And we take it into our lives, where it blends, as the Dosha teaches us, with our knowledge and wisdom. And then, when we need it, we can draw it out of our lives, of course, for any situation, through Daimoku, and use it in our own circumstances and in exactly the way we individually feel it can be used. So in other words, the master and disciple relationship in this Buddhism is a matter of learning to stand strongly oneself, strongly enough to be able to bring what we have learnt forth ourselves on our own initiative and use it in our daily lives and actions. So this also has a bearing on the way of the master. One doesn't find the master giving you, for example, instructions if you're a group leader on how you should be a good group leader in your particular part of London or street in a provincial city. He doesn't give me instructions about how the movement for Causton Yufu should be run in the UK. So of course that's just as well, because he couldn't know every corner and every circumstance in countries throughout the world. This is not the way of the master and disciple in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. He feeds us with what you would call a general understanding of the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin through his guidance. And then we use that, as I said, blended with our knowledge and wisdom of our local circumstances, experience of our local circumstances. And it comes out in the most beautiful way, just right for what we have to achieve in our particular area. So everything depends on me or you. Everything depends on whether we're prepared to take in what the Master teaches. And everything depends if we're prepared to practice as Nichiren Daishonin taught, and through that to gain the strength to stand strongly on our own individual path of life, where we what we term do kosarufu, where we advance the movement of kosarufu either through introducing other people to this practice or through some action which can improve the lives of people in society, our places of work, schools, or wherever it may be, families and so on. This is the master and disciple relationship. So in the Gosho, in one place, Nichiren Daishonin says, the master is the needle, the disciple is the thread. In other words, through his experience, the master is able to guide the thread into the right place in life where that person can fulfill themselves, fulfill their mission or true purpose in life. This is by guiding them in faith, not guiding them geographically, but in faith. The master is the needle, the disciple is the thread. So also, I remember Sensei explaining that the master's teachings are hongamyo, based on his experience, which is already past. The disciples' actions are honinyo. That is to say, the master's teachings based on the effects which he's learned from in the past. And the disciple then puts them into action, which is honinyo, making the causes to advance his life or her life and the movement of Kosan. So again, it is entirely through the fact that we find this gives us benefit as well as wisdom on how to handle matters in our lives, that practicing as the Masters taught us brings us benefit, of course strengthens our trust in what the Master teaches. So, as Sensei goes on to say, is the ultimate master of us all is Nichiren Daishonin. But also, we have to have, since Nichiren Daishonin is unable to speak to us in a way, we need a master who is human and existing now. So let's just read on and round it off.
The high priest further remarked, no one was more attentive to Mr. Makaguchi, the first president of the Soka Gakkai, than was his student and disciple Mr. Toda. He was even more obedient to him than if Mr. Makaguchi had been his own father. The high priest concluded his remarks with these words, the first and second presidents determined in full the attitude toward faith that the members of the Soka Gakkai should hold, and the direction in which the organization should move in the future.
So obedience to the master is not the obedience, the blind obedience of a slave or of someone who is petrified of their mum or dad when they're kids. It's the obedience of wisdom. What I mean by that is that through one's relationship with the master and with what he teaches, with what we read and put into action in our own lives, we begin to realize after a time that, as the Gosho puts it, he can see paths which we can't see. The example given in the Gosho is that birds and fish move along paths for great distances even, yet with our human minds and eyes we cannot see those paths that they take. In the same way, we begin to discover that the master can follow or see paths that should be taken that we can't see. So this again is not magic or mystery. The master's perspective is totally different to our perspective. The master's perspective of life is based on his responsibility, not just for Great Britain or for Lewisham High Street or Edinburgh or anywhere else. His responsibility is to view the whole world and sense the rhythm of life as it's affecting that whole world, and therefore the trends of the movement of Causton, the phases that it moves through, and the direction should be taken in each of those phases worldwide. That's, as I put it often, the layer of the cake of Causton, which he is responsible for. Therefore, quite naturally, he sees things which we don't see. But equally, the master doesn't see things that we do see. The master hasn't got the slightest idea how activities should be conducted in Kent or Sussex, or in Brighton or Glasgow. He leaves that totally to the disciple, and that disciple's individual faith. So, of course, it's a grave responsibility, it might seem. But then the master also knows that the disciple will be chanting the same words that he chants, and will have in his mind the same object of worship. Therefore, the distance between the master and the disciple, though it may physically or geographically be great, in fact is extraordinarily close. We are all connected, not only with the master, but between us we are connected to every member in the entire world. And we can follow a rhythm, the rhythm of Causton, or the rhythm of life, knowing that by that practice of Gongyo and Daimoku every day, we are in rhythm with the master and with everyone else in this planet who is chanting Nam-myo Renge-kyo. Okay, let's conclude.
I have quoted at considerable length from the words of High Priest Nichiren Horigome, but I think it is important to note that he sees the proper observance of the master-disciple relationship as the foundation of religious faith and the key to the attainment of the way of Buddha. He also makes it clear that the entire direction and advancement of the Soka Gakkai was made possible through the master-disciple relationship that existed between the first and second presidents of the organization. He is saying, in effect, that true Buddhism cannot exist without the master-disciple relationship, and that the attainment of Buddhahood depends upon the proper observance of that relationship. For those of us who are engaged in the basic cultivation of the life force, our fundamental teachers shall be the Daigo Honzen and the true Buddha Nichiren Daishonin. These are the only eternal teachers throughout the worlds of past, present, and future. And in addition, we must never under any circumstances forget that the first president of the Soka Gakkai, Tsunesaburo Makiguchi, and the second president, Josei Toda, who taught the worship of the Gohonzon to our present-day society, and through their own words and actions spread the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin, are our predecessors in the human revolution and our teachers in the attainment of Kosen Rufu.
So I hope today that some of our question marks about the master and disciple relationship may be answered through this short talk. And I hope too that it's understood there is, in a sense, nothing mystic about this relationship. The only thing that is mystic is that we're connected to him through the daimoku and the gongyo that we practice. But in all other ways, it's a practical matter, this master and disciple relationship of listening and then putting things into action. And teaching, furthermore, ourselves from what we learn from the master and passing it on to others. So those of you who have the two cranes in front of your Gohonzon in your Butsudan, as you know, one has an open beak, the other has a closed one. This represents listening and teaching, the fundamental place in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism of the master and the disciple. So, thank you very much for being here for this ceremony. I offered incense today, really on behalf of all of you, because, of course, Mr. Toda and Mr. Makiguchi, such important president of the Soka Gakkai, are no longer Mr. Toda and Mr. Makiguchi. They may be somewhere else already, I would imagine, with different names. But nevertheless, to be able to offer the incense is purely and simply to do with, in that small gesture, concentrating one's mind as purely as possible on their lives and one's gratitude for them. That is the purpose of powder incense, not some sort of mystic smell that wafts through and reaches them. It's purely and simply to purify our thoughts and our mind in the very act of making that offering. All right, everybody, so please enjoy the sun, and I'm sure there's coffee, I suppose, in the machines, John, is it? Oh, in the ivy room. This room in the corner here, over, you know, on the other side of the path, is called the ivy room now, but they haven't planted the ivy yet. Someone said it sounded a nice name. Okay, anyway, please enjoy yourselves for the remainder of your stay here. Thanks so much.